What's your I was so broke I had to story. One time in college I was so broke that I walked around the campus parking lot one night looking for change so I could go to Crystal's for a single slider, around $1.00. I guess I looked suspicious walking around the parking lot with a flashlight because a cop pulled up and asked me what I was doing. When I told him, he laughed, then drove me to the restaurant and bought me an entire combo meal. Ever since then I will randomly show up at least twice a year with dinner for the night shift officers. One time when I first moved out, I lost my job and couldn't afford my rent for the month. Still managed to eat thanks to government assistance and the local food bank. My 80-year-old great-grandmother wrote me a check for $600 which allowed me to keep my home. I felt so unbelievably guilty. She's living off of Social Security and her late husband's pension and still found that stack of cash for me. Years later, when I had the money to spare, I went back to her and gave her a check for $600. I told her I was paying her back for the one time she paid my rent. She looked at me, smiled, tore the check in half, and gave me one of those frail old lady hugs. I broke down crying right then and there, and she cheered me up with cookies. I try to visit her as often as I can now. I want her to feel totally loved before she's gone. Let me tell you of my childhood. At one point I lived in a burned out garage. It had a dirt floor, windows without glass, and a doorway without a door. We covered the windows with sheets, and the doorway with a folded fridge box. My sister and I bathed in a cheap kiddie pool my mom found on the side of the road, and patched up with duct tape. She showered by tossing a water hose over a tree branch. She cooked our dinners on an oven rack propped up on cinder blocks. Our toilet was the bushes out back. For 3 weeks one time our only food consisted of eggs and bread, because that was all we could afford. Our clothes came from dollar stores, grocery stores, yard sales, and thrift stores. Walking everywhere because you couldn't afford a car, and when you could afford a car it was always on the verge of breaking down, held together with duct tape, Bondo, and hope. Going to McDonald's was a rare treat. Planning meals around us kids getting our free bucket pizzas from Pizza Hut. Moving each year, and changing school districts, because you couldn't stand to live in the current roach-infested, mold-covered death trap you're currently living in, only to move into something with its own set of problems. Having to postpone, having a birthday cake, not a party, never even thought of parties, because we couldn't afford it, because there just wasn't room in the grocery budget this week for a cake. Learning at an early age what a budget is, then realizing that your parent isn't bringing in enough to cover even that meager budget, that bills are getting postponed every month in a never-ending loop of cancellation notices. Watching your mom slowly starve to death because there wasn't enough food for 2 kids and an adult. Being outcast from your family because you're too poor to go on vacations with them, or attend cookouts where you're expected to bring food, or not being invited to birthday parties because you can't afford to get the birthday kid a present. Getting up at the wee hours of the morning to stand in line at food banks, clothes closets, and churches. Sometimes having to do this before school because your mom can't afford a babysitter. Knowing the shame of being on food stamps and Medicaid, seeing the dirty looks of those better off than you are when you're having to use one or the other. Being made fun of because you couldn't afford to go see the latest movie or played the latest game. Having to get a job at 14 just so your mom doesn't have to work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over your head and food on the table. The worst part though, the absolute worst part, aside from mom nearly dying, was having to use rose art crayons from time to time. During college I was so broke that I lived on crackers for a week. Found enough change to buy a jar of jam to go with the crackers. Took it home, so excited to crack it open. Dropped it on my kitchen floor, shattering the glass into the jam. It was either laugh about it or cry. Not me, but my Lithuanian friend at uni. That girl is out of this world. She worked tirelessly to afford studying here in the UK, £3,000 tuition PA. Back in the day, plus very pricey accommodation, because the UK government assumes you're stinking rich if you go to uni here as a foreigner. Even though she had a nice bit of spare cash in the bank at the end of every month, she put her disposable income straight into her savings. No bars, no meals out, no pretty clothes. I have witnessed her living on a £10.00 budget for a whole month. more than once. We'd regularly try to offer her some cash here and there, because living on rice and butter for extended periods of time is not great for you. She wasn't having any of it. We haven't spoken in a while, but I'm 100% sure that she's well on the way to becoming stinking rich. I once found a soaking wet pair of windbreaker style sweatpants in an alley. They were covered in dirt, totally soaked, and who knows what else was on them. I needed clothes that badly, so I went home, got a garbage bag, and brought them back to wash them. I still have them. They're good pants. I moved back into a second floor apartment without telling the landlady. She lived out of state, and the downstairs people had been renting there for years, so nobody really came to check in. So I moved my stuff in, just told the downstairs people I'm back, and lived there rent free. It only worked because the house was converted to apartments without splitting the power and water meters, so the arrangement was always to split it between tenants. So the downstairs lady just split the bill with me. I lived there and only paid utilities for a couple months, until I paid off a few outstanding debts and saved up for a deposit on a decent place. I didn't buy food. I'd hang out at the dumpster of a Little Caesars where a couple friends worked. At the end of the day, they'd take the leftovers to the dumpster to pitch. They would get in trouble for giving it to me, so I'd hide inside the dumpster below the edge, and they'd gently drop the boxes to me in case their manager was looking. I lived on leftover pizza for months. I gained about 20 pounds. When I was 7 to 11ish, my mom used to suggest that we play the let's build a den upstairs and all stay in it all evening and pretend it's a post-apocalyptic world where there's lava downstairs and we have to camp out with no electricity and eat cold packaged food because the kitchen is in the downstairs lava area game some evenings. I realized years later that we were all hiding from people who were coming to the house to collect money she owed for bills. If we pretended not to be in, there was nothing they could do. I know it's not that bad and a lot of other people had it much worse. I just remember the way she dealt with it is all. A guy I knew told me he made $25k the previous summer working on fishing boats in Kodiak. I arrived on Kodiak Island with $80 in my pocket and a few leads. Promptly gave the $80 to the owner of a bunkhouse for 4 nights stay and started stomping the docks. With 1 night left until complete homelessness, I got on a crew for a halibut run, and the skipper let me stay on the boat for a couple days until the season opened. For 2 days I ate the pepperoncini and white bread that was left on the boat, and collected cigarette butts off the ground which I emptied the tobacco out of, and bummed rolling papers to make some cigarettes. I had a period where I had no income for about 6 months. In that time, I ate everything that was in my cupboard. From plain rice, to expired Jamon stale bread, to a packet of powdered sauce made into a soup. By the end of it, all I had left was salt, and had unplugged my fridge, because there was nothing in it, and no point paying to keep it on. I was working as a temp, and I was getting ready to leave for a 12-hour midnight shift in a dog food factory. I had less than 1/8 of a tank of gas, and I knew I wouldn't make it there and back. I spent the whole 12 hours worrying about how far I would have to walk home. It was driving me crazy. In the morning, I took my dog food smelling t-shirt off, put it over the gas gauge so I wouldn't state at it, and started driving. I put my car in neutral rolling down hills. Probably didn't do anything, but it felt productive and coasted as much as possible. I made it to about 15 kilometers from home when my car died and started walking. At 19, this was the lowest I'd ever felt, but it also became furnace that hardened my resolve to get my life going in a positive direction. Sometimes you need a smack of reality to make you change. In college, I ran out of cash. I stayed in my dorm for spring break, worked 40+ hours while everyone else was on vacation, and ate only potatoes and oatmeal. After the first week of classes, I cashed my paycheck. I had just enough to cover all my books with something like $20 left over. So, I bought my books and went on my merry way. Bank of America, however, wanted its pound of flesh. After buying my books, my checking account balance fell below my monthly average, so the bank charged me a fee. Then, they charged me a fee for my account going negative. In reviewing my bank statement, it even appeared they reordered my transactions from chronological to what would cost me the most in fees. All told, I ended up owing over $100 to BOFA. In the end, I shredded my debit card, cancelled my account, and never forgave the bank. After graduation, I worked for a hedge fund. In 2008, I shorted Bank of America as the bank had a lot of problems and not so much capital. Never did I feel so good betting against a company. TLDR, I lived off of potatoes and instant oatmeal and counted every penny. Bank nonetheless charged me a fee for falling below my average monthly checking balance that made my balance go negative. Got revenge years later. Not really exactly the answer, but this is my story. I grew up with a single mom and 2 sisters. Mom was disabled so could not work, and we lived on welfare in Alberta. The shame of that was very real. I still remember one teacher asking the class out loud, who here is on welfare? This would have been because those wouldn't have had to pay for something or other, like we will now speak up in front of everyone. To this day, I'm 63. I eat like I'm in prison. My arms protectively around my place at the table. I remember going to bed hungry because there was nothing to eat. I mean, I lived in Canada for Christ's sake, and I had to go to bed hungry. I remember vividly around Christmas a stranger coming to our front door with 3 bags of groceries and our excitement over the damn food. I have 5 children and bills sometimes were not paid, but they never went hungry and Christmas was always good for them. They never had to know those feelings. And to this day my main charitable contributions are food banks and the Salvation Army, because these are things that keep other children from knowing those feelings that I hadn't have and cannot seem to communicate to people in any way that they can understand. I guess I'm rambling, but I'm glad my wife and children have no way to really know those feelings. Once, my partner and I were working a 14-hour shift on a Thursday, right before payday. We both forgot our lunch. We had a system where one would bring lunch for both, but this day we got confused and both thought the other was bringing lunch, and we were both absolutely broke. Like $0. 42 in the bank account broke. So we grabbed all the change from our respective cars and began pooling our money together for a $5 Little Caesars hot and ready pizza. We scrounged outside hospitals, and I even made a humorous Facebook post about donating to the cause. After 9 or 10 hours, it seemed we wouldn't have enough. We were cranky, hungry, and tired. There was only $1 between us and glorious, mouth-watering pizza, but with each call it seemed further and further away. We thought it was over until our truck broke down. We went back to base to switch out trucks, and while doing a rig check, we found 95 cents stuffed between the cushions of the passenger seat. We called in service after only checking our oxygen and if we had backboard straps. Requested the post closest to the only Little Caesars in the city. It was across the city from base, and it seemed like every call that went out was just far enough away that another crew was closer. I had been doing this job 4 years at this point. I've seen some shit in my career, but I can honestly say nothing was ever more nerve-wracking than that drive. As we make the final turn, I can see the building come into view, and it was all worth it. 100 yards and food would be ours. It was the most amazing feeling I had felt. Until we heard our get called over the radio. We ignored it once, hoping to just get close enough to the parking lot to use it to turn around. They called again, and we saw a fire truck lighting up down the road, heading towards us. Hope was lost as we answered the radio. Begrudgingly, it was my duty to key up the mic. 49 on. 49 stand by. We had a chance. Holy shit, we had a chance to run in, get the pizza, and hop back in the truck before they called us again. And that is exactly what we did. I've never cut in line before. I view it as one of the penultimate dick moves. But this day, I didn't care. There was a line of 3 people. The 2 in the back were talking to each other, and the person in front had just finished their order. They turned, and the cashier looked towards the 2 that were talking to each other, and called next. There was a pause. They didn't hear the cashier beckon them. I did it. I took the moment to take a step forward and proclaim my order to the small dark lobby. The cashier turns around, grabs one of the pieces out of the heater, and turns around again to find me throwing $5.40 in loose change on the counter. I felt so bad. I think I actually threw some of the money across the counter at her, because as I grabbed the pizza, I heard the sound of coins falling, which was only interrupted by the squawk of the radio keying up again. I didn't care. I had pizza. 49 glorious pizza. 49 on my glorious pizza. Nothing could make me happier than I was in that moment. 49. Disregard the job I sent you. Enjoy your pizza. Except that during uni, I failed to budget properly, so I ate stock soup for about 2 weeks. It was basically a cheap stock cube, 18p for 8, plus whatever I could find. At first I had some vermicelli, but after that it was a clove of garlic, and then some chili flakes, and then just stock. Looking back, I should have gone skip raiding behind supermarkets. I could have eaten like a king, but I didn't know it was a thing. Roommates buggered off for the summer, and I was left living out the tail end of the lease on a 3-bedroom place. There was nothing in the fridge, except 1 potato and a half bottle of ranch. Absolutely nothing else. I had no money, and I was fucking starving. So I put the potato in the microwave till I was sure it was cooked, poured ranch all over it, and took a bite. It was disgusting. Managed another bite, and threw it out. I don't understand Latvians. Fuck potatoes. The second half of last year was really bad. My wife and I were living from paycheck to paycheck. Around June, a collection company took all my money out of my account due to a hospital visit I had the previous year. So we had to resort to making our checking account negative to pay the bills. I would get my paycheck, and it would bring me up to a positive balance, but I would have to dig myself in the negatives, just to keep the electricity going and eat. This went on up until February this year, until I got a work bonus, which went to getting us out of the negatives. But we didn't escape it without consequences. Both my wife and I struggle with anxiety sometimes, because of how easily stressed we would be thinking about finances, me on a daily basis. I know it's not your typical ramen everyday story, but living with account constantly minus $800 messed me up, because if anything changed, we would have been so screwed.